and a very warm welcome to all our viewers. My name is Samantha Castle, and I'm the Senior Manager for Alumni Relations at the University of Pretoria. Tonight, we are launching a very special series called the Lead UP in Conversation with the VC series. This new series will see our Vice Chancellor and Principal moderate panel discussions with distinguished UP alumni. The Justice Ministers of both South Africa and Namibia are graduates of the University of Pretoria. And for our inaugural Lead UP in Conversation with the VC chat, Prof. Kupi invited both of them as special guests this evening, along with the Dean of our top-ranked law school, Professor Elsabe Skuman. Allow me to introduce our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Tawana Kupe, who will be our moderator this evening. We hope you enjoy this discussion, and please don't forget to put your comments and questions on slido.com, and we look forward to an invigorating conversation with our panelists this evening. Over to you, Prof. Kupe.
Thank you, Samantha, Senior Manager, Alumni Relations at the University of Pretoria. Welcome to the Lead UP in Conversation with the VC Alumni Virtual Chat. I'm so delighted that all of you here and that the ministers and the dean are here. This event's tagline is By the Book, in Conversation with South Africa and Namibia's Justice Ministers. And tonight, I'll be chatting to these ministers who are both UP graduates, as well as the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria, the top-ranked law faculty on the continent. We wish throughout this conversation to get an idea into issues of justice, social justice, priorities of the ministers, how the countries have handled their COVID regulations and laws, and also learn more about the University of Pretoria's Faculty of Law, which is, as you know, ranked number 1 by the Times Higher Education ranking. Of course, the university is delighted that the ministers could attend and that you could also attend. Without further ado, I would like therefore to present the Honorable Minister Ronald Lamola, the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services in South Africa, the Honorable Minister Yvonne Dausab, the Minister of Justice in Namibia, both UP graduates, proudly UP graduates. Then, of course, Professor Elsabe Skuman, the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria, and the first woman to be Dean of the Law Faculty in South Africa, at the University of Pretoria. I must add here that her deputy, Professor Charles Maimela, is the youngest Deputy Dean of Law ever at the University of South Africa, and the first Black person to be Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Law, the top-ranked Faculty of Law in South Africa and in Africa. As you have heard from Samantha, please use slido.com with the code ATLEADUP9SEP in order to insert your questions and also to follow our polls. All polls will run from Slido as well, and participants can vote on the platform, on this platform. So the first poll which we are going to run would be, the question would be, would you like to hear more stories from UP alumni who are influential leaders in their sector? So the options are, yes, I'd like to hear more. No, I would not. I would like then now to move, if you like, to our first question to both the Dean and the Ministers of Justice. As you know, the University of Pretoria's Faculty of Law has been ranked the best place to study law, not only in South Africa, but in Africa as a whole by the Times Higher Education World University Rankings by subject. Having graduated from this faculty, what would you say sets it apart from others in your country and on the continent? Yes, you can go first, Minister Yvonne Dausab.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I'd go first because I'm the guest on the panel. Professor Cooper, thank you very much for that very warm introduction. And I want to repeat, because this is a live session, a warm congratulations to both the minister who I have a number, and we've sent congratulatory messages to each other. I remember on the 28th of March this year. And since then, we've both been very busy. But also, a very, very warm congratulations to the Dean for being the first woman. I think it's a nice feat to be part of. Prof, let me just say two quick things. The first one, I think what I have seen from the publishing profile of the university through Pulp, it is a nice thing to have is your own publishing house, because it encourages research, it encourages students to publish. And because I was a postgraduate student, that was something that you'd want to be part of. Secondly, the kind of support that you get from the university is very, very important in terms of what are the resources available and how accessible are those resources. So I think for me, those are the two key things that are important if you're talking about what sets a university apart. But maybe a last one for me, because I was at the Center of Human Rights and it was a unique program, what set that program apart was the fact that you had over 25, more than 30 or so students from all over Africa that you had access to. And I think for me, that experience is very, very unique. If I look at any other university on the continent in terms of its scope and
Thank you, Minister Joseph. Minister Lamola, it's interesting that you didn't just take one master's degree from the faculty, you took two master's degrees from the faculty. A person only goes back to the same shop if they had a good experience and want more of the same. So what is it?
Yes, Prof, and that is the exact reason why I I went back to the faculty. But firstly is to thank you for the warm welcome and the flowering introduction, and the dean of the faculty. Welcome and all the best. Yes, I have already congratulated Ms. Yvonne on her appointment, and wishing her all the best because we are within the SADC region and the African continent. It's a new breed of leadership for this continent and for the SADC region. And I think it's a very important, particularly for the rule of law in our region. What it has set apart for me, Prof, and that's the reason why I came back and back and back, is because of the support and the online library that was easily accessible with the good support. And even within the program that I did first, I hear you are saying I did the two master's degrees, but I did not start there. The first one was a certificate in competition law in terms of the diversity, and also the instructors. They were able to guide us, and I was already working at that time. I never thought I will again go back to school, but I made it so easy, and then encouraged me to then do the masters. And when I did my first masters, I thought I may not finish, because the first day in class, I could see Professor Delport was shocked that now there's a leader of the youth league in this class. There's going to be chaos, and there will be no harmony. But I think we ended up getting up very well, and a nice diversity within the class, and the camaraderie made it possible for us to achieve the outcomes, I think, at the time. And the second one was also a very good one, because it was more practical, with people with practical experience it was the first of its kind in the African continent. And that's what attracted me, because it brought divergent expertise in terms of practical of doing the work, geologists, engineers, and surveyors, and so forth. So that, to me, then told me that there is a beginning of a convergence of professions. And I felt that was very unique contribution, because as an undergraduate student, you only think of the law. But when you are now in practice, you now realize that all these professions, there's somewhere where they converge. Thanks.
Dean, I want to bring you in, but also I want you, as well as I'm asking the ministers, how should tertiary institutions like UP or yours prepare students for, professions in the justice space and in policy making in general?
Thank you, Professor Kupe, and thank you for the warm introduction. And also, good evening to the two ministers. I'm really honored to be in your company. And of course, to very, very important alumni from our faculty. Congratulations again on your academic achievements as well. So, Professor Cooper, I don't know if you know this, but this year marks 40 years ago that I was a first-year student at the University of Pretoria. That's a very long time ago, and this faculty has come a long way. I never thought I would be the dean of this faculty, but I really treasure this university and this faculty. Yes, I think you have to be relevant these days if you want to be a successful university, if you want to be a successful faculty. We follow an inquiry-led approach to all our teaching, and we are very well equipped. And I think that's one of the things that puts us ahead, maybe, of other universities. As you've mentioned, we are in the top 100 in the world. It's also very important for a university in Africa to have an African focus. And I'm very pleased that both our ministers here tonight, they've done master's programs at my faculty where we have a very strong African focus. Both master's degrees were focused on Africa, and as you know, we have the Center for Human Rights, and they've got many programs focused on Africa. But we are also very strong internationally. We are one of only 3 faculties on the continent that are members of the Law Schools Global League. And therefore, we also collaborate with a lot of international partners. For us, it's important to be an African law faculty within a globalized world. We've got a very large doctoral program, and we also aim with that doctoral program to make it relevant, to make it practical for students. When they enroll for that, they can use those skills. And finally, I would like to say that proof of the fact that we are relevant is that within this COVID pandemic, we have even become more active. So the Center for Human Rights, they have launched a series of webinars. Our insurance unit has been very active as well, applying insurance law to the very unique problems that arose during the COVID pandemic. And finally, our Center for Child Law, they've been very active as well. They intervened in a number of court proceedings, and Minister Dausab will appreciate this because she also works in this area. One case they intervened in regard to the access of children living with disabilities to schools. So we have been so relevant with this COVID pandemic, and I think that's what universities and law faculties should be. We should be able to apply the theory of law in practice. Thank you, Professor Kupe.
Thank you, Dean. I think you have earned your salary increment for this year with that speech. Yes, Minister Dausab.
Jess, thank you very much. Prof, just maybe to add to, maybe tagging on to what Minister Ramola was saying about the need for acknowledging the disciplinary nature of law, but also there's a brilliant book actually that was written by Professor Frans Viljoen from the faculty, called Beyond Law, and it looks at the multidisciplinary nature and the interaction that law has with other sciences, particularly social sciences. Now, this is important for the question you're asking, Prof. The question you're asking is, how do we prepare our students, I suppose both at undergraduate and postgraduate level, for their interaction if they want to get into the political space? For me, it's important that your teaching staff the profile of your teaching staff is important. So, that they're not one-track minded, that they have a broad understanding of the social and political dynamics in the country, but also it's important that the publishing profile of the faculty reflects the issues that the society is dealing with. Like Professor Skuman is talking about how the faculty is responding to issues around the pandemic and so forth. But for me, what I've seen, and this is also something I shared at the University of Namibia, is that what I've seen is over the years that the faculties have focused on what we would, your normal human rights and other substantive areas. Whereas there are other areas of law that also allows you to engage with society, areas of law reform, areas of legislative drafting, for example, and also engagement, for example, with the Office of the Attorney General, something that our students would not otherwise be familiar with. And that kind of engagement, curriculum focus would help with, preparing our students to be able to diversify, because law is one area where our students have not sufficiently diversified. For example, media and the law. What is our law students' engagement with the media? What is their engagement with community activities? What is their engagement with social justice activities? So we need to redesign, if we have not already done so. I'm sure the University of Pretoria may have gone ahead and develop and design a curriculum that responds to the needs of the societies in which we live.
Minister Lamola, you want to add something on that one? No, you're covered. Okay. So
I'm covered.
you're covered. Let me move on. Both of you referenced directly or referred, and so did the dean, that you are relatively young ministers. So I'd like to ask you whether the next time I'm interviewing you, you might be president of your own countries, and what your own thoughts are on the inclusion of young people in the governing of our countries. I note that in Namibia, I think there's a very young minister who's in her 20s. And if I'm not mistaken, she is a minister of, is it communications? No?
Yes, she's actually the deputy minister. She's 23.
Yeah.
And she was selected just like myself by the 8th that the president selects. So our president has actually been very, very progressive and revolutionary, I think, in making that decision to make a 23-year-old a deputy minister, because the next thing should obviously be the consideration to become minister and so forth. But she's doing an excellent job, and she's also been actually acknowledged as one of the 100 most influential people in Africa. So she's really making Namibia very proud in her engagement with the global world, but also her interaction with the youth at the local level. So to answer your question, Prof, just to say, because I think Minister Lamola will probably take an extensive view on this one. But for me, two things that are important. The one is engagement at political level, because the manner our governance structure works, I know both in Namibia and South Africa, it's really based on the political activity. And political parties, and we have ruling parties, and and when I'm saying ruling parties, I'm not just talking about necessarily SWAPO and ANC. I'm also talking about any party that's going to rule at any given time. So it's important for youth for us young people. I'm not so young. I know I look young, but I'm over the youth bracket of 35. And I suspect Minister Lamola may also have a slight challenge, but I suspect he's younger than all of us here. Is that they will have to make inroads into a political space. Political party involvement is very important. I do think also that political parties, particularly those of us who've been in this space, and I'm specifically referring to SWAPO and the ANC, is that we need to think about how to make our rules of engagement a bit more flexible so that young people can get into the system. And here I'm talking about membership, because the biggest challenge that young people have is how they get involved at the level of structures. And if you are not involved at the level of structures, where there is your section, your branch, your district, and eventually the region, depending on, I mean, South Africa has a slightly different profile. You may have a challenge where young people, if they're not politically active, even if they're competent, may not be able to get into the system. So we need to, as political parties and as political leadership, particularly the older guard of the political leadership, we need to think about how do we deliberately take steps to get our young people to get into the system.
Minister Lamola.
Yeah, no, thanks, Prof. Kupen. My view is that this signals a new era in African politics and in the SADC region. That there is space to participate in meaningful engagements and decision making for young people, not only with regards to politics, but for boards, for leaderships of sports bodies, and so forth. That the requirements soon going forward, it will no longer be the fact that you are in exile or you are from Robben Island, but the capabilities and the skills of a new generation is what is now going to guide us. And I think that practical experience that Minister Joseph had plays a very significant role in the cabinet itself when decisions have to be taken, the understanding of that practical life. And I think that is the same kind of knowledge and kind of perspective that we bring into the space, into the body politics in cabinet and in politics as a whole, that we are now able to bring real practical experience of practice of academia post-democracy. So I think for me, this is a signal that a new generation must now come to the forth and reshape the SADC region and also the African continent. And there is a space for young people to do so in various platforms, as she has already said, of political parties, but also various movements that are still playing a role in influencing the trajectory of society, and also the various platforms like NGOs and churches. They could still exert some kind of influence in the trajectory of our society and of the African continent as a whole.
So I'm going to ask you a bit of a tricky question now, is that you sit in cabinet with your colleagues. So some of them could break the law and be candidates to be arrested, or decisions could be made which later on the courts find are unconstitutional, invalid. And you sat there and you were party to the under collective cabinet responsibility, you were party to that. Don't you feel like you have, in the first one, that you are sitting on a very tight fence, on the second one, that you did not do your job properly?
No. It's an easy one. The justice must prevail, though heavens may fall. It doesn't matter who and how. The rule of law must be the anchor of any constitutional democracy. Yeah. So that one can't be negotiated. On the second one, there will obviously be challenges in that regard. The key thing is whether the advice that the department has provided, was it informed by the objective factors? Was it rational? And was there no ulterior motive? If there was no ulterior motive, it was done in a manner that all the checks and balances are put. And we really firmly believed it was within the boundaries of the Constitution. It does not mean that we don't know our job. It's the reality that law, the dean of the faculty can say there could be different arguments to different viewpoints and opinions, up until a court has said this interpretation is wrong and so forth. But the key thing is that we need to do it within the ambits of the Constitution.
Okay. Yeah. Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the principle of hermeneutics, because once you and so there will always be a question around the challenge of the interpretive challenges that we have. So we have a supreme constitution, and I sit in the fortunate position that we have an attorney general, and the attorney general is constitutionally endowed with the responsibility to provide legal advice to cabinet, and then there's also the constitutional obligation of cabinet members to take collective responsibility for decisions. So here is what is important. It's when you need to provide advice, when you need to participate in those decisions, it is always for me consistently to provide the advice that is correct, so not to speak untruth to power in a way. And whatever the decision is, we have to stand or fall by that particular decision as a collective. But I think in the end, we are guided by the supremacy of our constitution. And of course, we are provided by the interpretive challenges that you'd have in any setup where various views would make up what the correct position would be. But the buck for us ends with the Attorney General. If we are sued, the Attorney General is the one that would have to then defend the government in any particular issue. But I always try and speak the truth.
Yeah. So I'm going to push both of you, and I want a yes or no answer on this one. If cabinet, including the president, took a decision you really totally disagreed with, would you resign or stay on?
So I think the principle of collective responsibility suggests that if you have lost the debate, because that's really what we should focus on, is how do you convince the rest of the collective to follow what you are saying? And if you don't succeed on that part, there are only two things that is left. You stand with the decision of cabinet, that's a constitutional obligation, or if it goes against the grain of your principles and values, and you cannot defend it publicly, then yes, the correct thing would be to resign.
Mr. Lamora?
Yeah, no, I doubt the cabinet can take a decision deliberately knowing it is unconstitutional. I have seen it myself with now, particularly with the regulations. You will have seen sometimes there will be delays and so forth. It was because we're still waiting for legal opinions on various issues and regulations, because cabinet always wants to make sure that the decisions are informed by proper legal, sound legal, are taken on a sound legal basis. And various of them, some of them have been challenged, but we were convinced because of the legal opinions that we received. And the cabinet would say this decision is within the ambit of the law and that of the constitution. But some could be challenged and be found to be wanting by the courts and all those things. But the reality is that by the time we take the decision, it is within the ambit of the law in our view, and it is also in the interest of the country. So it is, I doubt we can have really that kind of a situation. What could happen is that the decision can be lawful, but you don't agree with.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, and I mean, that is the reality that you have lost a debate. Your other colleagues, a persuasive argument or superior logic has prevailed. You will have to stand by the collective decision.
Okay. Dean, what do you teach their students who become ministers, judges, and so on to do when such situations arise? Yeah, you are muted, Prof. No, that's one of the statements of the year. You are muted. I was muted. Unmute yourself.
I was muted by the manager, I believe. Yes. Yes. So the students always want to know, but what is the answer? And I always tell them there's no single correct answer. You have to argue. You have to argue in a balanced way. You have to argue both sides, and then you have to come to a decision based on authority. And so that is why there can be different answers. That is why cases go through the courts and they are appealed and they go on to the next court. So it's a very complicated business, this
Law and
business of law.
politics is
I just wanted to add that even with the court, sometimes they are disagreeing. You can see and read from the court's opinion that they were not agreeing with the view, even in the legal interpretation.
Prof, just a quick one, just to say that that the issue about collective decision making is that, and I like what Minister Lamola was saying about, we need to know that all the decisions that cabinet takes, it's invariably in the best interest of the people. We may not always agree with it. But what they say is we must ensure that we take a decision believing in good faith that it was the right decision that we took at that particular time.
So I think we're due for another point.
Professor Kupe, even the one of banning alcohol was in the best interest of the country.
Okay. Banning tobacco. I'm quite sure,
that's dangerous.
I'm quite sure there's a lot of people who disagree with you on that one. Marius, I think do we have results now for the our poll question for the second one is which types of leaders would you like to hear more from in the future? Political leaders, business leaders, civil society leaders, women in leadership, academic administrators, in other words, vice chancellors like me. We like to also to talk to you. Please vote at least UP9 SEP. Now, moving on then, or do we have, I guess we'll get the results for the poll, for the first poll later. But what I want to move on now to is a question. I'll start with a statement. Justice delayed is justice denied. I want the ministers to say to me whether they believe the justice systems they are responsible for do not have inordinate delays that result particularly in poor people who cannot afford legal fees, and just generally in the statement justice delayed is justice denied, being the situation and being the perception of the justice system.
Shall I?
Yeah, you can go.
It's like we are in that corridor situation where we are trying to, since I became justice minister, of course, I was in the law and justice sector for a very long time. I have tried to anchor the understanding of justice generally, but also that conception of justice with what I call justice imperatives. So what does justice look like in Namibia? And it was really informed by the kinds of complaints I was getting in my office since I was appointed as minister. And so for me, the 5 or so imperatives were the fact that, you need to, if you're talking about justice denied and is justice delayed, you're talking about, do you have sufficient safeguards, constitutional provisions and protections that deals with issues of justice? I mean, and there are varying forms of them, but fair trial rights, the right to dignity sort of sums that up for me. But of course, there are other rights. But for me, I look at them from that perspective. And then the second aspect is the efficacy of your justice, or particularly your criminal justice system. How efficient is it? In other words, do you have access to courts? Are prosecutors available and competent? Do you have magistrates? And are they available, and are they competent, and do they have integrity? And then so that's your second aspect. And then it's also the question around legal advice and aspects around legal aid, for example. So do people have access to legal representation? and also what is the quality of lawyers that people get, because sometimes people complain that because it's a lawyer that I'm not paying for, it's the state paying, people are neglecting their responsibility, they're not handling the matters in the professional manner in which they should handle them. So it's a question around legal advice and legal aid, but another important one that is not so at the forefront when we talk about justice delayed is justice denied is the question around legal services. And here I'm specifically talking about access to maintenance payments, something that is very important for particularly vulnerable communities in our society. Questions around estate services, for instance, the effectiveness of the Master of the High Court, in the appointment letters, in the finalization of deceased estates, questions around insolvencies, and so forth. So for me, and then, of course, the other important aspect, which has to do with Dean Schoeman, is the question around the involvement of the academia and also the involvement of legal practitioners. And here I'm talking about the independent legal profession in questions of social justice, because we haven't used the law to enhance social justice sufficiently, I think. And I've seen that very acutely during this COVID-19 pandemic. So what role do lawyers play, when limited services are available to members of our public, when there is reduced income, and you have been retrenched and you need a lawyer, the lawyer who's also struggling to make ends meet, represent that particular client for free. So it's a number of dynamics, but I think it has to do with understanding the context, because sometimes justice delayed is not necessarily always because of the state. Justice delayed is sometimes has to do with the various parties that are involved in the proceedings. And I don't think we always understand that sometimes the accused person, for example, is the reason why a matter is not proceeding as it should, or the number of witnesses that you have that has to get through the trial proceedings and cross-examination and so forth, that prolongs the particular proceedings. I mean, we had a treason trial that ran for over 10 years in Namibia, and it had over 100 plus witnesses that had to be called. So it's really the context that is also important when we talk about justice delayed is justice denied.
I wonder whether there was a Stalingrad strategy in that case here. But Minister Lamola.
No, thanks, Prof. Kupe. I'm also wondering. For me, the end also justify the means. In that, on the point that Ms. Jasup ended, I have also answered the question in Parliament, I think a week ago, on the same issue that how many accused persons do we have in our correctional facilities who have been there for more than 5 years, where their trial has not been completed. And on going through the number of the accused, I can't remember, there were about 27 or so of them. And then I had to go through why the trial was not finalized. And as she says, and most of the reasons were because of the accused, either they were sick, or either they changed lawyers from time to time because they are delaying the trial. Either the other co-accused, they are not there, particularly where you find that is more than 3 or 4 accused and all that kind of a situation. But there could also be delays that have also been occasioned from our side in terms of investigations not having been completed, particularly in the criminal justice system, witness statements, and all those kind of things. But I think at the end, that long process sometimes does produce fair results for everyone. The only challenge is the time period and the issues that then will affect the victims, because also the victims wants to see an expeditious end to this ordeal or to the trial, which is also not only in the interest of the victims, but in the interest of the community at large and society as a whole. So that dissection of that kind of intriguing difficulty, it's what we grapple with on a day-to-day basis. But I think one of the key features and outcomes of this period of COVID is the reality that we need to modernize the criminal justice system in terms of technology, in terms of use of relevant other electronic means of expediting and fast-tracking processes. Hence, we are also looking at our own Criminal Procedure Act to enable us to run a full-blown criminal trial on an online platform like this. And so some of those rules and so forth, we will need to modernize them to be compatible with modern society, because some of the delays, as I was looking into the records, they could be mitigated by the use of technology.
Okay. So, Prof. Dean Skuman, what does academic research say are the reforms that need to happen to ensure that justice delayed and is not justice denied?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Kupe. It's all about access to justice. And I actually want to support the two ministers. I don't think you can rush the law. It's far more important to reach the correct decision, and it might take time. I know I won't be popular for saying this, but it is better to take time and reach the correct decision. But I also think it's important what Minister Lamola is saying, that we can effect certain reforms, and we may be able to make the process quicker and more efficient. We've now seen how easy it is to get so many people together on one forum tonight, even from Namibia, and we did not even have to leave our homes. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do, and we are certainly looking into that to concentrate much more on online courses, and also how to practice online, how to effect these procedures online. I think that's going to be crucial going forward, to be able to effect justice efficiently. But I want to emphasize, we still need to go through the process. We can't rush it.
Minister Joseph.
Just Professor Skuman, on the slide, the issue around digitization, an important one. I think everybody is realizing it now, but it does have one problem, and that is the fact that not everybody has access to digital devices. And I think what the pandemic has shown us, whether it was in the education sector, whether it's in the justice sector, is it has shown us the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And when you're talking about access to justice, this is another thing that we've realized when you're talking about justice systems and its accessibility to the ordinary man on the street, is that without people actually having to walk to the door of the master's office or to the maintenance office, I mean, with maintenance payments, it's easy because you can have a bank account, and one assumes that everybody can try and have a bank account. But you would have a real challenge that you could leave some people out. But I think it's an important migration from manual way of doing things, having to be in the same room, than to be able to do it through a digital platform.
So there's also been critiques that perhaps imprisoning people or incarceration is an outdated form of meting out justice. And there's a lot of academic research, especially in the United States and in Europe, that I have read. So what are you, given also that in African conditions, often overcrowding in jails? I was listening to the judge who does the inspecting of prisons, Judge Cameron. He's retired now. When I listened to his interview yesterday, he was very scathing about some of the prison conditions and why some people are even in prison and weren't given an alternative form of. What would you say yourselves about whether we should use incarceration in the manner in which we are? Especially also sometimes, as you say, you agreed, there are some delays for people who are on, remand for a long time. Their case eventually comes to court and they are found not guilty, or in fact, they are given a much lighter sentence than they were in jail. So is incarceration and putting people in jail still the most appropriate form of doing these things. Of course, not everybody is incarcerated for any crime. I take that for granted. But for the people
Yeah.
that are incarcerated.
Yeah, no, it is still one of the most appropriate. I agree that you need a mixture in that regard. We have a prison population of about 155,000 now, but it was at around 170,000 before the president gave what is called a special remission and special parole. Out of those, about 55,000 are remand detainees. So it's almost a quarter of our prison population is remand detainees who are awaiting trial prisoners. And it does worry us that when these processes take long, it does means that we are now having people in their huge numbers who have taken the space of those that have now are sentenced to be in our facilities, because our whole capacity is at around 112,000 for the whole country, but we're at 155, which is about 20 or above 20% population. I think where the judge has a point is on the fact that from our research and observation is that those that have been in our facilities for very petty crimes, or what you can call low risk crimes of less than 2 years, they are the majority in terms of reoffending, or what is called recidivism. Those that have stayed for more than 5 years, I think the system has really touched them in terms of rehabilitation programs, and also them also understanding that when they go out, they need to behave differently and in a different context. But those that have stayed for a very short term, sometimes they go out and commit very heinous crimes, and which shock the nation, even shocks the world. And in terms of states, those are the majority. So that is the balance that we need to strike in terms of those short-term kind of offenses, that some of them can be handled through community corrections and all that. But how then do you balance the real contradictions that exist in society? That society wants to see somebody who has offended society imprisoned, and in the view of society, that person must be punished. You know, in society's view, you being at your place, reporting to the police, doing community service, doing some work is not real punishment. So I think that is the contradiction that we find ourselves dealing with, Prof.
Minister, then I'll come to you, Dean, about what research might show us about what are credible alternatives.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'm not responsible for prisons. It's a different minister, and it's interesting. And I think it's, we were actually looking at the South African model of the Minister of Justice also being responsible for correctional services. But I take the one thing that I agree with is that there's need to reform generally correctional services, but also sentencing options. One of my former students at the University of Namibia actually wrote a brilliant piece, while he was at Oxford, on we need to look at reforming sentencing purpose in Namibia. And I know that we now have legislation on what we call child justice. And if you predicate it on the child justice model, what he is proposing around understanding the purpose of sentencing, we will have to look at reforming it. And the reform would obviously be based on the role of what is the profile of the offender, the community, the crime itself, but also how do we look at, and he actually placed it in a paradigm of Ubuntu and the African value system. So is the African value system based on punishment or restoration? So the notion of restorative justice is something I think that's been talked about a lot. We have certainly incorporated that aspect in our child justice system and legislation that we are proposing at the moment. But I think sentencing, and the reforms around sentencing should not just be left to courts. He argues, and I agree with him. It should be something that is already through maybe perhaps through legislative and policy thinking, we can already develop that kind of thinking in our legislation. So definitely, I think we need to look at the reform around those areas. But should we take people out of incarceration? Do we have alternative places where people still have a sense that they're serving, that they are, kind of not punished, but they are being, that they are doing, that they are restoring some form of justice for the wrong that they have done? Because law is based on finding a remedy, in the event that you have been wronged. So we cannot take away that principle of what how law works, and the concept of justice is based on finding a remedy for wrongdoing. So it's a long debate, Prof, but I think one that we should think about.
Jean, please.
I'll just respond very briefly. Yes, I'm also not really in favor of incarceration, and rehabilitation is really, really important for me. And so, Professor Cooper, you will also appreciate this. I think there should be ample opportunity in the prisons for people to educate themselves, libraries, and to further their education. And I think that is very important. If we have to have people in prisons, that they should be able to do that. And I know that they are able to do that in many prisons. Also know in other countries, there are privately owned prisons, for example. I don't know whether that, works better. But of course, I think a lot of research still needs to be done. And the person who finds the solution will no doubt win the Nobel Prize, I'm sure.
Move on now to the ministers on the tricky question of corruption, especially corruption that involves people who are political office holders and in political parties. In both countries, there have been recent scandals, corruption scandals. In Namibia, it's the fish scandal, as the minister knows, or the fishy scandal, as the media would call it. And in South Africa, there have been allegations, and here one is talking about allegations around, tenders for PPE and other related matters. As you know, corruption normally reduces the public's confidence in leaders. And let me here also add that one shouldn't look at corruption by public police office holders only, because for a corrupt act to occur, there's a corrupter and a corruptee, if you like. That the private sector is not immune to that. In both countries, also in South Africa, we have a massive scandal called Steenhof, where there was a serious fraud by the chief executive office. So white-collar crime is a big thing. So what do you think we should be doing in Southern Africa to prosecute people involved in corruption, in part also to restore public confidence in politics? And because I hear many students, I'm a vice chancellor and I've been a dean, all of that. All along the way, when I spoke to young students, they were saying politics is not for me. Those people are corrupt. So how do we stop young people becoming cynical about politics? Because in part, they think that people who are corrupt and have power get away with it.
Yeah, Prof, you were not far off when you said Stenger is it's also the operations of Hullet.
It's the operations.
the Hullet operations. They also have their own scandal of board. It's not only one.
Yeah.
I think for the students, Prof, they must start by being people of integrity in their SRCs and their own governments.
Ours is high integrity. I can assure you, the UPSRC is high integrity. But on a serious note, I think that the rule of law has to reign supreme in any kind of an environment. And I think we also need to ensure that the institutions aimed to fight corruption, they are properly resourced, but also the legislative instruments enables them to do their job in terms of independency, in terms of them being able to take decisions without being any kind of influence from anyone. And the only guide should be the Constitution and what could be their enabling legislation.
But the pressing question for us as a country, in my view, is that corruption has become very sophisticated. And as you are referring to Stenhoff, you are referring to Hullet, and even our own corruption in the public service space with the PFMA and the MFMA, it does need also sophisticated kind of skills of a multidisciplinary nature, which combines forensic, combines accounting, combines analytical skills, and so forth. So that is the instrument that we need to be able to build within the institutions of the state that are aimed to fight corruption. But firstly, it will be preventative measures in terms of the instruments, because once it happens, it becomes expensive to deal with it. We are at 700 and we are almost at 720 million for the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. So you can see the expensiveness of corruption once it has occurred. So hence we are currently working on more instruments to deal with preventative measures with the Auditor General, with the National Treasury, to prevent it from happening. And I think that should also be a program that happens also in the private sector with the JSE, also dealing with rules and regulations that will ensure that within the accounting processes of private or listed companies, there are also preventative measures, ethical leadership, and compliance to the King's Code. So I think that should be our first call as a nation in terms of integrity, in terms of prevention. Then when it does happen, you need those well-resourced independent institutions to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. Minister, we're now kind of running towards the end of time, so make your answer direct and shorter. Yeah.
Yes, let me make it short, and it actually saves me. But just to say, the corruption brings, it does point out that difference and the importance of the separation of powers, because your judiciary and your executive, in many instances, I mean, ours is an example of that, is kind of pitted against each other. So it's important to recognize that these institutions are independent and separate, but also that there are certain principles of law. For example, the presumption of innocence is an important one that our people don't always want to accept, but it's the reality. If you want these institutions to work well, you need to make sure that you keep them separate. But thirdly is how you support the institutions that investigate any allegations, particularly of high-profile corruption. It's important that the investigators are competent. It's important that the prosecutors and the judicial oversight bodies are well-resourced and competent, because the kinds of corruption that we experience is also very complex, and it requires all the resources. And it's important for the government, particularly the executive, to be seen as supporting those institutions so that they can do their work effectively.
In 1 minute, Dean.
Yes, I agree with both ministers. Fraud has become so sophisticated, and we need very, very sophisticated systems. So it's a lot of research to be done in regard to that as well. I also think it's very, very important that universities develop programs also to assist in the education and teaching and further research of this area specifically.
Okay, now I think we're coming to the end of our program. I really would like to thank the ministers for attending. When we thought of this, first, we didn't think they would agree. Second, we thought they would agree. Then urgent business of the state will lead them to cancel, but that didn't happen as well. So they've set a very high standard for ministers who are alumni of universities. So I'll now go for other areas of government where we have alumni. We have 5 or 6 others, I think. I won't mention them now. But thank you very much. I think public debates of this nature are important. The University of Pretoria believes that one of its impacts in society is to bring leaders in society, in government, in the public sector, in these kinds of platforms. We are going to continue with these conversations with the Vice Chancellor and alumni virtual chats. The next one is on Tuesday, 22 September, and it's a discussion on heritage. Heritage is important to people's identity, their history, and their capability to, be active agents of democracy and socio-economic development and achieving the sustainable development goals. Today's event was brought to you by the University of Pretoria's Alumni Relations team, one of the best, I think, in this space. So we want to hear your opinions on this event, whether you found it informative and helpful. So please complete the final poll for the day on Slido. The question is now up. It says, how likely are you to refer this lead event to business colleagues and other alumni, with 1 being very unlikely and 10 being extremely likely? So please answer the final poll. And that remains for me as Vice Chancellor and Principal to thank you very much. Our alumni, the ministers, and yourself belong to arguable, I know I'm the Vice Chancellor, but I can say arguable, the top university in South Africa, the top university in Africa, and one that compares globally with the best. Thank you very much. You come from the best. You are the best.
Thank you, Prof.